Welcome everyone back to Cat's Eye on the Future. This week we're really happy to welcome back our guest Rowan, who's trained as a Druid
Seer.
Yes, and she's recently passed, I believe, all of her initiation and things, and which she had not quite completed the last time. And we're going to talk about a number of subjects. And first of all, I'm just going to let her kind of introduce herself again and tell you a few things about herself.
Oh, good heavens. Well, I'm Rowan. I am 62 and still surviving. I have lots of cats and lots of books, like many other pagan folk. I have been more or less pagan for about 50 years, although not officially so originally. From the time that they informed me in the Episcopal Church that I could not be an acolyte because I was a girl. I went down in the woods near the house and set up an altar to the old gods because I had read my Kipling and I knew they were still there.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I know last time we talked a little bit more about the organization and such, but I was hoping this time you'd tell us a little bit about some of your own experiences.
Well, I was not one of those amazingly psychic children. I wasn't a particularly psychic child that I ever noticed at all. I had feelings and things, but I dismissed them as about coincidence, as one is taught to do. I've had a lot of precognitive things over the years, but none of them are the dramatic sort you hear about. Mm-hmm. But I think, and shall I go into what we were discussing a little earlier about music?
Oh, certainly. I was only looking at my watch because I wanted to know what time we were starting, and I'd forgotten to mark the start time. That was not you need to wrap it up now. We've only been going a whole 4 minutes.
People have asked me over the years, well, can you learn to be psychic? Well, my response on that is that it's like musical talent. This is my perception, and others may have a different perception. Most people can learn to pick out a simple tune on a guitar or piano or whatever instrument they have handy. Most children, if you hand them a plastic recorder, will eventually figure out how to play Row, Row, Row Your Boat on it. Most people can sing a simple song, can sing in the shower if they're self-conscious and if no one else is listening. But if they practice, it will get better. If they try to play something harder, it will get better. If they take notes about, well, I tried to do this today and it didn't quite work, so now I'm going to try 2 more verses tomorrow, it will get better. And admittedly, you do have, in the musical analogy, you do have a very few folk who are unfortunately tone deaf, and a very few psychically not gifted people who are what some people call totally head blind. But some people think they have the psychic abilities of a brick because they've been taught that, or because they've been taught not to use them, or because they were around such a stressful situation as a child that they threw up enormous walls that now they don't know how to get down again. On the other hand, with psychic or magical abilities and music analogy, once in a while you get Mozart. Mm-hmm. Even Mozart had practice. If you practice something, you'll probably get better. When I took up working with the rune staves of the Elder Futhark, I had no idea what in the world I was doing, but I practiced reading them. I read books by people who knew what this was about, and I wrote down what happened. I took notes on everything I did. And I would not call myself anything like a rune master because I don't like titles, and I don't think it would be applicable even if I did, but I'm better than I was, and perhaps more apt at it than quite a lot of people, but that's practice. Let's see. Now, just working with general psychic ability, I think and I found this myself, and more so recently, if you have a little, I think this is going to happen, write it down in a notebook, write it down with your computer, however you prefer to take notes of things. I think this is going to happen, and if in 2 hours or 2 weeks it does happen, then go back and take another note. Yes, that happened. I had a feeling that that somebody was going to have a bad accident at this particular intersection or this particular roundabout, and they did. I thought it was going to be me. That's why I was very scared that day, for example.
Yeah.
And then it turned out it was 2 hours later, the fellow behind us. Because you felt perhaps the sense of something impending. There's a phrase you hear sometimes about an accident looking for a place to happen. And sometimes that's exactly what there is. Out there is something looking for someone to light on.
I think we also have some tools that were not as available to even people, and not just the ancestors, but until very recent times. For example, I always knew that I had a little bit of earthquake sense, and having read Mary Renault, who's a wonderful historical writer, she's passed on now, but she wrote a lot of novels in ancient Greece, and one of her heroes, Theseus, has earthquake sense, and I thought it was normal, and everybody knew this, but it was really hard. Sometimes, most of the time I knew, but not always. But with the advent of the internet, I'd been able to realize that certain impressions or feelings I would get, if not every time, but after a while, it became so frequent that if I ate popcorn, my husband would say, so where is the 7.0 or above earthquake going to happen? Because about 8 times out of 10, I would be craving popcorn and in a certain way. And within 24 to 48 hours, there would be a very large quake somewhere, or a smaller one nearby. But without the internet to get that immediate feedback, I might not known for 6 months that there had been an earthquake in Japan or wherever. But the writing down of even the kind of, just, it doesn't have to be something serious like an auto accident. Just, have this feeling that I'm going to get a phone call from my aunt that I never hear from. Right. And then she calls. That kind of thing can help that development. But keeping, I think, something on the computer or whatever, or writing journal, that just makes it easier. But also using for other kinds of things, using the internet to get things out is something that people just never could have imagined even 50 years ago.
Yes. And it is very useful in another sense, because you also get to talk to more folk and say, oh, other people have this little thing that I'm not the only one, I'm not imagining it.
In fact, the popcorn thing, I didn't first notice on my own, but years ago, like nearly 20 years ago, when the internet was really just getting going, I heard a show with someone called The Earthquake Lady. And I wrote her privately because I explained it. She said, do you crave popcorn before quakes?
Oh my.
And I said, well, I've never thought about it. And she said, well, they had a little group in California because they had a larger community. So they had gotten people together, and something like 5 out of 6 of them discovered that they crave popcorn before quakes.
Oh my.
So she asked me, and then I started tracking it. And yes, as a matter of fact, I did. And it's a different kind of wanting popcorn than just, I want a bowl of popcorn. Because I like popcorn. Yeah. But it's an actual, even if I am down with a stomach flu and couldn't eat popcorn if my life depended on it, I'll still be dreaming of popcorn type of thing. But as you say, I'm not alone. Right. And it was actually someone else who asked me first, because they had noticed in their group that they did it. Otherwise, that bit of knowledge 100 years ago would have just stayed in California with this little group of people. Maybe they might have written it in a book. Right. And maybe someone might have read it, but also it might just have kind of died. Maybe. So I think it's a great way to just share things like we're doing now.
Right. I began more working with augury.
Oh.
As well. And particular birds and things. I think I might have mentioned the goose on the previous show.
That's okay, because why don't you tell us a little bit about auguries?
Well, an augury, it was a very popular method of divination in the ancient Hellenic world, and indeed in quite a lot of Indo-European cultures. It is a seemingly random event, which has meaning. Now, I'm not... The trouble, and this is again something I was researching, the Hellenic traditions are not my own, but I've done a little research for a couple of things. And one of their seers said that the difficulty was not even in interpreting the augury, the difficulty was in perceiving which of 10,000 random things happening in a given day was a message from the gods, and the other 999 weren't. because you can drive yourself nuts thinking every single thing, oh, there's a fly on my toast, that's an omen.
Yeah.
You can drive yourself crazy doing that. It's the picking out of the one that stands out somehow. Maybe it's that one flower that seems to have kind of a light around it. Or your cat's who never jumps into your lap, suddenly jumps into your lap and scratches you and runs away. Was the cat just being weird, or is someone telling me something? Figuring out what is the omen, what is the message, takes a lot of listening and takes a certain amount of clear self-perception. Don't fool yourself into thinking, I really want this thing to happen. I really want Johnny to fall in love with me. So every time a leaf falls, I'm going to say, oh, that's an omen. Johnny's going to fall in love with me. No, that won't help you.
Mm-hmm.
I go out on my back deck every morning. In the winter, it's before dawn. In the summer, it's a bit after dawn. But when I first get up, I go out on this little back stone terrace and I listen. Is there some message? There isn't always.
Mm-hmm.
There was last spring, there was a robin defending his chosen tree. You know, this isn't a robin call, but I say bird songs in the spring translate as my tree, my tree, my tree, my tree. And I looked up, and the shape of the branches was very much like the rune Othala, which is the hearth and home, the Inengard. And I felt like the robin was telling me to take care of my house shields.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I might go out in the morning and the only message from the natural or spirit world are 3 squirrels who really wish I would just drop those peanuts and not stand there looking at them.
Messages from critters.
Messages from critters. Come on, feed me.
Feed me.
But I have a family of blue jays that wait in the trees and then drop like little feathered bombs as soon as the seed is down. But in your road, learning to perceive the one bit out there that is a message, and there isn't always one. Sometimes there won't be one for days or weeks in a row, and sometimes you have 3 in the morning,
mm-hmm.
or 3 in a night if that's when you do it. There used to be old folk traditions, things like if you dropped a fork, that meant company was coming. And that was sort of a type of augury. The one I mentioned about the goose was one I was guesting at an ADF ritual with a different group than the one I was usually working with. And they had a young man who was seeing for the ritual. There's always a seer who takes an omen. Sometimes they're a ranked seer, sometimes they are not a ranked seer, sometimes the person who is the chief celebrant does this, sometimes it's someone else. But at any rate, this young man was taking his omen. He was, of course, doing a very competent job of it. But there was a goose in the night, in the dark, circling us, calling. And I listened to this goose, and I finally sort of put up my psychic hand and said, that away, because he was looking for his flock.
Mm-hmm.
And he flew off where I had indicated.
Right.
Because that's where I felt they were. And we didn't hear him circling around and honking anymore. But when the young man had finished doing his formal omen, I asked if I might speak. Somewhat to their surprise, because this is not usually part of the ritual, but I felt very much that the goose was telling people, this was at Samhain, the goose was telling people that it was going to be winter, there was going to be difficulties, there were going to be times when you needed to find your own, to find your kindred, whatever they were, to stay with your own people, and not to never associate with anyone else, but that you needed to find the people with whom you were safe, with
mm-hmm.
whom you could work. And I told the folk this, and apparently quite a few people have not forgotten Rowan stepping in and talking about geese after somebody else had done his own omen, although they do seem to remember it positively. But that's the kind of very strong omen that comes along once in a while.
Yeah, we had a situation here at the house where we had a hawk
mm-hmm.
fly through the window and break the glass.
Ooh.
And poor little thing, my husband picked it up and they put it in a box. And by the time we finally got a hold of the proper wildlife person, another housemate had taken, and the little thing did fly off, so he was okay. But he was like stunned because we didn't know how to care for a hawk. But I went on the internet again and I looked, and it turned out that hawks flying through windows are almost all over the world.
Would be.
But there's a difficulty. They all mean something different. And since I had no particular intuitive flash, I still to this day don't know what the hawk fly. If anything, other than this poor lost yearling hawk just didn't realize it was a window. But hawks, it's like cats don't recognize doors. Hawks don't recognize windows.
Right.
But as they just don't exist for them, so they'll just try to fly right through them. But it happens seldom enough that people all over the world have noticed it, and depending on where you are, it just traditionally means one thing or another. But I think it's
or a bad thing.
Yeah, it can be either, and I have my own suspicions as to actually what it might have meant. But that would be the question for the seer: would be, is this whatever it traditionally means, or is this just a hawk that got lost?
Yes. Yes, and that's the thing. Going back to the practicing aspect, and as I was thinking, we were talking a little about earlier, I was not one of those amazingly psychic children. I was not one of those amazingly psychic teenagers. I got some more abilities in my 20s, but then I unfortunately spent far too long living with someone who did their best to squash them. And it's taken me a while to recover. But that's one thing I wanted to mention for folk who might think, well, I'm old, I'm middle-aged, I'm whatever you are, and I'm not an amazingly intuitive, naturally gifted person, so I'll never be psychic, and I wish I could be. Practice. Play your chopsticks on the piano. Practice. It's not too late. It really isn't. I've had probably more development, as I said, I'm over 60, probably had more development in the past 4 or 5 years than I had in the previous 20. You just have to work at it, and like practicing your scales if you're a musician, practicing your singing if you're a singer. Runners do not become Olympic athletes by going out and running up and down the driveway twice. Whatever it is, work at it and keep notes of your progress, and I think that's very important.
I do too, and some of the more recent shows I've been doing sort of a series based on some notes that I was hoping eventually make into a book. And that's one of the things that you talk about is, some people, the unseen comes looking for them, and other people sort of have to practice to look for the unseen. But even if they do that, a lot of times, once you get going, the unseen may start looking for you. It starts looking back.
Yes, when it starts looking back at you, and that can be very, very disconcerting.
Yeah.
Even if you were looking at it and this was something you had wanted all your life, and you were looking for the unseen, it's looking back. I've had that.
One of the things I like about the particular Druid program you said you were in is that, like a lot of good systems, it seems to put a foundation there so that if it's already looking at you, you get some kind of control. Yes. And if it starts looking back at you, you've got some preparation.
Yes. And I think it also, the program with ADF that I've been working with and am continuing to work in and with, it helps the self-discipline. A lot of the people, a lot of folk aren't self-starters. A lot of folk need to have their hands held a little bit more along the way. I'm fairly self-starting, and I don't need a whole lot of hand holding, although a little now and then is good. But it gives you something. It gives, the way it's set up, it gives you a possibility of people you can ask. I don't understand what they mean by this thing. I don't understand how I'm supposed to do this exercise. Well, try this. And, in the beginning especially, they're not demanding that you suddenly turn to and become an expert in oracular trance. Learning how to enter a basic trance state is a good first step. Oh, you don't want to, okay, we're going to back up a little further. Meditate. How do you meditate? Well, sit here and count your breathing. That's a good start. Go for a walk and focus about a particular thing. I do very well with a moving meditation and a moving trance. I've had a lot of trance dancing I've done in the past, and I can still shoot straight in just a couple of minutes that way. Whereas if I have to sit or lie down, it'll take and focus my breathing. It might actually take me a little longer than it would with the right piece of music, because the right piece of music is the right association, and there I go.
Mm-hmm.
I something I won't go into long detail, but I had a set with some bagpipes that I just sort of almost accidentally went straight off elsewhere.
Well, I think that's a good small topic for a bit, is when working in trance work, or actually a lot of types of psychic or meditative work, having key words or key music or keys that sort of set it off, and also that form a, we'll say, bridge between this world, the altered state, or the other world, and then back when it's done. The disadvantage I find with music in that is that if you hear, it's not like some sort of weird hypnotism where you automatically fall back into it just because you hear it at the grocery store because someone has put on a pipe band song.
Right.
But on the other hand, it can be a little disconcerting when you hear it out of context.
Yes.
But that's where training comes in, and you just say, no, we're not doing that right now.
Yeah, there's a particular piece by the British New Age musician Terry Oldfield, and the piece is on the album is called something like Celtic Blessing. It's about a 17-minute piece, and I've used that often for trance work, trance dancing particularly. Perhaps it is not really necessary to say that I don't dance as lively as I did 30 years ago, but I walked into a New Age shop and they were playing that. And I had wait a minute, no, out of context.
Yeah, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. You just, particularly if you're not expecting it, it's like, okay, no, but we do learn that kind of control, and that gets over practice comes in.
Yes.
But it's very useful when you're first learning to go into these states to have a key
yes,
of some sort.
It is. And I find it very useful to have certain things that and it isn't necessarily a piece of music. Some people find a particular scent will send them. Scents are extremely evocative. Scents go straight to our lizard brains. You think about maybe the scent of fresh grass will bring back to you the memory of your grandfather mowing the lawn when you were 3 years old. Scent of fresh cut grass, something like that, which it does for me, just incidentally. A scent, but again, you don't want to be utterly dependent on that thing. These are tools. You're the one in charge.
Yeah, this is where I think a lot of people get confused because they'll see, like, particularly a bad Hollywood movie about a witch or a wizard or a practitioner, and they have like their or even Harry Potter stuff, which is actually quite good. But there's the magic wand, and there's the magic bell and the magic sword or whatever, and I've always believed that those are props and they're useful as sort of keys, but a really good practitioner or somebody that's very well trained can usually just make mental images if the actual object isn't there.
Yes. It's good to have the right tool, because really no sensible person would try to take a fried egg out of the skillet with a screwdriver, and no sensible person would try to fix the hinge on the door with a spatula, although both of these you could probably manage it if you had to. But they're tools. It's still the person who provides the intelligence, the focus, the minor degree of muscular power to flip that egg over onto a plate without dropping it on the floor where the dog is standing, and things like that. But a good tool is very useful. You're not going to try to fix that hinge with your fingernails. No. At least I'm not. But if I had to, I would come up with some jury-rigged thing. But it's good to have the proper tool for a job. But you're still the one doing the work. You're still the one providing the intelligence to know that you don't really want the spatula when you're fixing the hinge.
Exactly. And that's part of what the training is.
Yes. It is part of what the training is. And part of what the practice is, and part of the sense of saying, I need a Phelps head for this one. Yeah. As it were.
One of the things I thought we might talk about a little bit too, particularly given the time of year, I'm recording this in early October of 2014, and for anybody listening to this in the show reruns, you've done an awful lot of what is called, I think, chthonic work with the dead and work with the other side. I wonder if you talk about that a little bit.
Well, in what aspect?
Well, just I mean, I get a lot of people to come in and say, "Are you a medium?" And I'll say, "Well, no, not exactly. But if you really want to try to ask your grandmother something, we can use the cards as a focus to see if she's got an answer."
Right.
And I was thinking something along the lines of just about anything you want to talk about, but like, safe ways to contact the dead, ways you might want to kind of avoid, what is the other world, and in your opinion or your experience, what are kind of just what types of interactions can occur?
Well, let's see. I wouldn't myself have said I do that much work with the dead compared to some people. I'm certainly not a medium. Well, for example, I bought my house almost 10 years ago, 9.5 years ago, and I bought it in the late summer. And I kept thinking I heard someone talking, but I thought, well, it's the neighbor over the fence, because I knew I had an elderly woman living next door to me. And then the autumn came around and the windows got shut because it was cold out there. And I realized that the back room, what would have been the second bedroom of this rather tiny house, someone was talking in there. And I'd go in the room. No one, of course. Go back in the kitchen. It wasn't like someone screaming in anger or anything dramatic. It was like the voice of an older woman just talking as if she's talking to someone about the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Nothing particular. I said, And I thought about this. I'd done a basic cleansing on the house before I moved in, but I hadn't picked up anything particularly nasty, although there were a couple of odd corners here and there. But so I thought about this a little. It was like, well, I don't think we need to do some kind of banishing. It was her house first. I'd wander kind of towards the back room when I had the tea kettle on. Ma'am, I'm going to have some tea. Do you want some? And I maybe put a little cup of tea in the back room. I wasn't using that back room for a great deal the first year or so. It's kind of where I set the library because I have books all over.
Mm-hmm.
And I just put the tea in there. And after about 6 months, one day I heard the voice, but it sounded a little bit different somehow. And I walked back there and said, I know this was your house. I'm sure you were a better housekeeper than I am, because that's not difficult. But it's my house now, and you don't have to worry about it. And since then, I haven't heard a thing. I occasionally see the ghost cat that comes in from the garage, and recently I heard the clicking of the nails of a small dog on the hardwood floor. I'm like, oh, we have a dog, okay. But I haven't heard a word from her since then.
So that would be sort of possibly like not what we might think of as a ghost or an apparition.
Somebody was still kind of there. It wasn't a dramatic haunting. It wasn't anything the National Enquirer would have found fascinating. But most things aren't dramatic. You think about your daily life, there's an awful lot of diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle, going along and going along and going along and getting things done without huge dramatic events. Well, I think the other world has a certain amount of that too. I have done some work with unquiet spirit in cemeteries, and I've worked with some other people with that, walking around, for example, one of the old mountain cemeteries until you find a spot where there seems to be a disturbance. Sometimes it's where someone is, and it's actually fairly rare, where someone's stuck. They don't know how to go on, or they're so dang stubborn they won't. A friend of mine was doing some of this, 25 years ago, and she said she encountered this spirit that was an older woman who was not departing until she saw the pearly gates opening before her. So my friend did a rather good visualization of the pearly gates opening before her, and the woman kindly went on to where she needed to get onto. But I tend to end up more actually with children spirits of children who were stuck or confused because, mommy told them to wait for her. And either something happened to mommy or perhaps the child died of a fever and didn't realize that they couldn't see Mommy when Mommy came around because they weren't on the same plane anymore. And they're somehow just stuck and waiting and a little scared, and they don't realize they've been there for 50 years or 100 or whatever it is. It's just beginning to seem kind of a long time. I encountered a small ghost spirit in the London Underground. She had been killed in the bombing raids of World War II. Mummy told her to wait till she got back. Well, I retrieved her from the London Underground, sort of carried her with me for a couple of days until we got things arranged for her to go on to where she needed to.
Yeah.
But...
And you're able to, or this happens to you without like going into full trance or something. These are
yes.
just...
This is a walking perception. It's like opening up some doors to perceive. I don't go walking around every town looking for ghosts. I'd get nothing else done.
Exactly. That's kind of, when you were talking about the children, I was thinking there's a movement called, I think it's EVP or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but it's where people go in. It used to be with like cassettes, and now they use digital recorders, and they go into places like graveyards and or old hotels or that kind of thing. And sometimes they get nothing, but sometimes they just leave the recorder and they'll pick up voices. And some of the most chilling ones really are, they'll just like little voices of children saying things like, you know, where are you?
I've heard some of those, and again, I think some of them I'm pretty sure are something or someone responding, and some of them, you know how if you look at the clouds, you see a face. If you look at the tree bark, you see... The human mind likes patterns.
Yeah.
The human mind arranges its perception into patterns.
Yeah.
Whereas perhaps if you showed those clouds to some kind of a computer program, it would not perceive a face. It would just say, this is a light spot, this is a dark spot.
Yeah.
And I think some of the EVP recordings, or perhaps the human ear is perceiving something and the mind is saying that's a pattern.
Yeah,
but I think that others are something or someone. Sometimes I think some of the ones people think might be a ghost, a spirit of a human, are something else that never was human. And maybe speaking.
I've wondered that too, because now some of the early ones, especially when they didn't have the digital equipment, really do to me sound like seeing the cloud and seeing the elephant. Not all of them, but some of them. There's the one digital one that I was never sure whether it really is a child or whether, like you said, it may be something that was never human. Is somebody says in the real world, in the mundane world, they say, I think it's, you know, I need to take time to take a nap tomorrow or something because they've been up late. And when they played the tape, this didn't, I mean, the digital recording, this didn't happen until later. But when they played it, this little voice that sounds like a little child says, cat nap, kitty cat, ha 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 ha. And it's either a hoax, which I don't think it is, because these people, the reason they get interviewed frequently on this internationally known radio show, much bigger than mine, is because they're not making any money, they're not writing any books, they're not charging anything. They just do this because it's what they like, you know, it's their hobby almost. But my thought was that was so clear. But is it actually a child or is it something else? Because there's a lot of things in the other world that I think people, and actually maybe you could talk about that a little bit. What kind of beings? We have dead people, but what else is probably there?
Well, there are certainly ancestral dead, very dead people, what some folk call the mighty dead, and some of them that are considerably less mighty. But there are a lot of natural nature spirits, you could say, and there are a lot of entities who, I'm trying to come up with a good neutral word, entities who live a step or two over. It isn't this world, but it isn't some huge alternate universe that's just close, but it's not quite here either. I read an interesting something years and years ago that this world and other world may be like 2 pages in a book. They're side by side, they're pressed up close to each other, and once in a while the ink bleeds over. But they might have totally different things written on them. And they might be the continuation of one story to another, or there might be this is the end of this story. This is a picture of something completely unrelated. But other entities, there are some who we perceive as having human or human type forms. There are individuals who are perceived as being like animals, or some of the mythological creatures of this world. There are, I think, I don't know if these forms are intrinsic to them, or if it's something they tried out and decided they liked, or if it's something they take on because that makes it easier to communicate with humans who have some communication ability. I don't know if it's if some being might actually look rather like a Tolkien ent, like a talking tree, but if we can't perceive them that way, we can't take in the vibrational register of their voice unless they put it somewhere in the spectrum we can hear. That might be something they've chosen to do. On the other hand, they may really be in the shape of a walking, talking tree. Most of the active entities I have personally encountered have taken some shape that would be familiar or almost familiar in this world. I haven't, because, and as I said, I don't know if that's because they're taking on a shape I can perceive.
Yeah.
Because if they were just a cloud of whirling fire, I would probably say, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah, I mean, you say we don't know if this is a shape or an impression they're taking on so we can perceive them, or is this really how they see themselves? And
right, or maybe it's not how they always see themselves, but it's kind of fun, so they put it on sometimes, like your favorite shirt.
Yeah.
You are not, the shirt is not you, and you are not the shirt, but you do wear that green shirt quite a lot because you like it, sort of thing. So I honestly don't know. I don't know if anyone does know, but that's all right. But I have not, as yet, encountered anything, because I am good with my shields and take precautions. I haven't encountered anything that's out to get me out there. On the other hand, I don't deliberately go, shall we say, walking into dragon caves either.
No, and I think, again, that's where the shielding and protection exercises are so important. Even if a person feels like nothing's really happening yet, it really is actually important to create and construct those shields.
Oh, absolutely, because the other world is not a playground, and it's not Disneyland.
No.
And there are things out there that will take a strip off you, if not actually do you some serious psychic damage, for which you may need an expert practitioner to get those pieces of you put back together.
Yeah.
Because, yes, there are. As I said, I've been fortunate so far, and I have some good allies, and that's another thing. If you have individuals, whether they take a human shape, an animal shape, or whatever shape they take, individuals, that's their native turf, and you and they have developed a relationship. And this is not achieved by saying, I am going to have a unicorn for my ally. No, that's like shopping for curtains. You don't always get to choose. Sometimes what comes up and taps you on the ankle is a chipmunk. Hi, I'm your ally. Okay.
And I think we often get modern perceptions that cloud our understanding of what some beings are. I've mentioned this before, but once when I was doing trance work, a young woman came and asked what her animal ally was. And she was I didn't remember it because I don't remember a lot of what comes out of trance, but she reminded me. She was very upset and came to talk to me afterwards because she was a lovely young woman, but rather round herself. And she had been told that her ally was a cow. And she was thinking modern moo, dairy cow, oh goodness, I'm fat, I'm fat,
Slightly
I'm dumb. Yeah, dim. And I explained to her that even the mildest dairy cow contains the memories and the racial memories and roots of what cattle were before people domesticated them. And I pointed out to her both actually many of the strengths of even domestic cattle and how important they were and how powerful they were and how I think I'd have to look it up, but how the animal that kills more people than any other,
I believe so.
Yeah, is cattle, And then I told her to go look at the aurochs and the ancient cave paintings, and by the end of it, she was going, wow, this was really a very strong, I think, a powerful totem, an ally for her to have. But she just was thinking, 5-year-old kindergarten, Daisy the cow.
Right.
And not even really understanding that even Daisy the cow was actually, in her own way, quite a powerful being.
Well, cows appear in many mythologies. They're sort of an Indo-European thing. You have the cow licking life out of the ice, and
well, yeah, and I didn't know enough then to tell her about Adumla, the ancient cow that creates the modern world by licking the glacier. But I'm sure later, as she looks, and as my husband said, in Iceland, gray cows are magical beings, sort of almost like a unicorn, except you do occasionally get a real gray cow.
Right, like the ones in the Irish legends that are the white cows with the red ears.
Yeah, it's the same idea, only in Iceland, gray animal, it's a gray cat, a gray cow, a gray deer, any of these things are magical. It's a magical creature.
You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melodi, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melodi with an I, psychicreadings.com for information, or email me at melodireader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future.
Yeah, now one of the things I thought you might want to talk a little bit more about too, because I think really when I said the dead, I was really thinking, I knew you worked a lot with the ancestors and the ancestral mighty dead, and talk a little bit about your own experiences and kind of, what they do traditionally and how we interact with them as their descendants.
Well, I think in the general pagan world, there isn't, at least or has not until recently, been enough attention paid to the ancestors. I know some of the Afro-Caribbean traditions and Hispanic traditions pay more attention to the ancestors than most of, shall we say, the Northern European paganisms. And I think that's beginning to change a little, and I think that's a very good thing, because the ancestors, they've got your back.
Yep.
They want you to be good at this. They want you to succeed. Everyone has a few relatives that they don't want to see living or dead. And you run into some folk who say, "Oh, I can't work with the ancestors because my grandfather was really abusive." Well, he was only one person. You have hundreds, thousands of ancestors. If you've got a whole layer of 2 or 3 generations that were just really god-awful people, go back further. And how do you start talking to your ancestors? Well, I started by saying, "Here is an offering. I am having some beer. I am pouring a shot glass full of beer for you. This is for you, my ancestors." No particular response, but after a while they notice.
Yeah.
If you call on them, if you're doing whatever your regular practice is, you can hail them, not call on them. This is a sense of come here into my living room. You can say, my ancestors from Ireland, my ancestors of the Cymry, the Welsh, my ancestors from Saxony, whatever ancestors you have, even if you don't know their names, you can say, ancestors of this place. One of the ways I hail my ancestors, because I studied Scots Gaelic, although I have no particular reason to believe that any of my ancestors speak Scots Gaelic or ever did, is, and there are phrases like this in many languages. You could probably research whatever language of choice is Carjas fala na Carjas cree, means kin of the blood or kin of the heart. The ancestor is not only the ones whose bloodline you're actually descended on, but maybe that first grade teacher who helped you so much. Maybe that kindly old man down the street who always made you smile.
Yeah, I was going to say too that this is particularly important because I've run into this in my practice, is people who are actually orphaned and have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, their adoption was a really big thing, and you can't. And there was a question that came up recently on one of the Ossetry lists: has anyone ever had sort of an ancestor adopt them? Mm-hmm. And I told briefly the story how when we first moved to Ireland, we rented this old castle for a while. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but part of it had been built by a particular gentleman who sort of adopted us.
Right.
And to my knowledge, neither me or my husband have any O'Carroll background at all, but it went so far as when we had to leave the castle, he sent his direct descendant to make me come and view the house we're recording this in now, because I wasn't going to go see it because it couldn't possibly be in our price range. She called me on the phone and said, no, you have to see this house and I will take you. And it was his direct blood descent,
right.
From the same family. Mm-hmm. And so he took care of us in that way.
That's great.
And but he's an ancestor of the heart.
Yes.
As far as I know.
Well, that's the other thing about, and people do ask about adoptions or, my family kept no records, I have no idea, sort of thing. Well, two things. If you're adopted, you have two sets of lineages.
Yes.
You have your adoption lineage and you have your birth lineage. And even if you don't know who they know who you are.
Yes.
And I told a woman this fairly recently. She was just totally blown away because she thought she couldn't do any ancestor work because she had no idea beyond her grandparents. And she didn't even know what their ethnic ancestry was particularly, other than some kind of probably Southern European.
Yep.
They know who you are, your ancestors, and they just are usually quite delighted to hear from you. And if occasionally you get a cranky one, well, that's all right too. We aren't all sunshine and light every day. And sometimes a cranky ancestor will tell you, basically, they don't do it in words, but have you ever considered cleaning your kitchen floor? Once in a while, sort of thing.
Yes, I once got a message when I was trying to working on my musical work and thinking about my harp, and this rather cranky voice said, "Once you learn to tune it." And we were just having a little visit from another type of ally.
Yes.
We've just had a little cat come in through the window, and that's her saying meow. And I don't think it particularly means anything other than the cat is saying meow, but she's definitely here. So if you hear meows in the background, that's a little kitty. But back to what we were talking about.
Well, obviously that's a great omen.
That's a great omen. Yes, it's a perfect omen. The cat has come through the window, but this time the window was open, I might stress, so the cat is fine.
Right.
But I wonder, getting back to the ancestors, if one of the changes in particularly neo-paganism that's coming about is because as people have gotten a little older or more interested and studied some of the background, both in the Celtic and the Norse, for example, the ancestors are hugely important. Or basically, particularly some of the ancestors who sort of become, if not exactly gods, they sort of become what we call the mighty dead, or the Alfar, or I'm not sure what the Celtic version is, but basically, or the Irish or the Scots, but it's this idea of, at least in the Norse, there's a lot of fuzziness between what is a mighty ancestor and, say, what is an Alfar.
That's like trying to draw the line between a really powerful nature spirit and a god.
Yes.
It's like, I don't know where it categorizes. I know it's bigger, older, stronger, and wiser than I am. Therefore, I will be respectful.
Well, a perfect example right now, again in October 2014, is the fact that in Iceland there was an awful lot of people came as colonists, so they brought some of their spirits and beings and people with them. And the volcano that is currently going off, well, we call it Barda Bunga, but that actually means Bardar's bulge.
Right.
And Bardar apparently originally was an ancestor, an actual person who lived, I think in Norway. And it was an ancestral spirit by the time the people came to Iceland. And he lived on the farm for a while, but then there was this volcano and he became sort of associated with the volcano and then came to live in the volcano. So at that point he becomes called an Etten. Right. Or giant spirit. Right. So it's, like you said, it's bigger and older than I am. Is it a god exactly? Well, that's above my pay grade, as I put it.
Yes, that's humans like to categorize.
Yeah.
Humans like to put things in boxes. It's like seeing patterns too.
Exactly.
I want to know what it is so I can give it a word, and then I don't have to. If you know what it is and you can give it a word, then you kind of control it.
Yes.
Except you don't.
No.
That's another thing I tend to say. This is a little bit off topic, but I'll throw it in anyway because it's a thing of mine. People say, "Oh, I picked such and such a deity for my patron." Were you shopping for shower curtains that you picked them? Did you ask them if they wanted to be your patron? I think very often when a spirit, goodness knows, a deity, an ally, it's pretty often the other world that does the picking, not the human who decides they're going to be the god spouse of the god of the moment.
No, actually, I think that's a good topic to sort of segue into. And how would you suggest somebody go about finding a patron, or not everyone, I should state this first, not everyone has a particular deity to whom they are primarily attached.
No,
but
by no means.
But most of us have at least several that we feel a little closer to than others. And how would you suggest people go about that?
Well, I think it's important to read, to do a little research, and not just go with the god of the moment, whoever's particularly important because of something in popular culture or whatever.
We're not mentioning Loki at all here.
No, we're not. And he is not one of those who particularly associates with me, although I cannot say we have not ever met.
Always invite him to your parties. He's going to come anyway, and he's a lot more fun with an invitation. That said...
Never mind what happens when you're bottling your brewing and forget to put out an offering first.
Exactly.
Washing the floor with good mead. Anyway, how do you find? Well, you don't have to have a patron, or some people say matron if it's a goddess.
Definitely.
I don't myself like that phrase because to me the matron is the nurse in charge of a British hospital ward. But I don't say patroness either because I don't say poetess. It's just kind of silly to me. But anyway, finding the deity with whom you best associate, perhaps. Read, do research, see to whom you are drawn. Sometimes you might discover, oh, this particular deity that I never heard of because they're not big these days is actually in charge of my specialty. You may have just found the goddess of knitted hats, or whatever, and someone who will be happy to work with you. And then you perhaps pray, make offerings, find out what they like. Don't give them strong red wine if they're really a honey cakes and tea kind of deity, and vice versa. I'm not going to approach some of the deities who have a name for liking strong drink in large quantities and offer them a dainty demitasse. I should say I'm not eclectic. I don't take one from column A, one from column B, and one from over here. And I would be just delighted to have what we call my hearth culture within ADF be one thing or another. I would be perfectly happy that way. But that's not how the gods decided to do it. So I do have some associations with some deities from the Gaelic pantheon, particularly the Irish, and a couple of the Norse deities. And there are one or two others who stop by now and then. My first, I guess I could call her patron because she's put up with me for over 30 years, was Brige. And I think that's because it was 30-some years ago I started brewing mead. And she may have noticed this because I didn't even know to call on her then.
Mm-hmm.
But we got better acquainted as we went along. And I was not particularly interested or attracted to the Norse or Germanic pantheons. Oh, little cat. But I had a friend of mine who's an excellent storyteller. I'd heard some of her stories, and this was kind of interesting, which may have stirred up the notice in my mind of these folk. And I was camping on the high plains of Wyoming. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd just come back from a bardic circle. We'd even put the drummers to bed. And I looked up, and standing in the gateway of my camp was a tall man with a floppy hat pulled down, leaning on a long walking stick. And I knew who had come calling. And I spoke very politely, but inside I said, oh, shit. Excuse my French. But it was, I knew immediately who had come calling.
Yes.
And it was probably my doing for singing bloody songs that asked people if I was majoring in creepy. Well, sort of. But anyway, so it was not my intention to go looking for deities from more than one.
Yes.
More than one hearth culture. And I prefer not to. There are other individuals. Manon McLeod has been so kind as to work with me for some things,
Mm-hmm.
and he's actually very nice to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't tend to call on more than one culture within a given ritual.
Right.
If it's just doing my own observances in my own house, well, I'm going to touch on those who work with me, because I'm not going to say tonight I'm only going to talk to these and tomorrow I'll talk to those.
Right.
I'm just not going to do that.
Yeah.
But if I'm doing any kind of even semi-public work or ritual, I'm going to stick to pretty much one thing or the other.
Yeah.
But it's once again, finding someone. You may find, research, you found deity X, you think you're a perfect match, and you start making offerings, and deity X may say, you're not mine. You're not mine. Nope. Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Or they may not bother to answer.
Yep.
If they're polite, they may say, sorry, you're not mine.
Yep.
And if they're really being nice, they may say, over there.
Yeah.
Look at that guy. But, or someone else may come up behind you and tap you on the shoulder and say, excuse me, did you know I was the god of such and such a thing in a different culture?
Yep.
Yeah. I don't think you have to have a particular, and some people get very off on this, you don't have to have a particular genetic background.
No.
To be involved with the deities of a particular culture. It may help if you do. It may make it a little easier if you are Italian to work with Roman deities.
Mm-hmm.
I don't work with Roman deities, so I'm just sort of throwing that out there.
Oh yeah, I think that's a good
example. It may make it a little
though.
bit easier, but it's certainly not a requirement. And honestly, the folk of the ancient world moved around more than we think they did.
As do modern folk. I mean,
As
one
do
thing
modern folk.
I've had pointed out to me and have pointed out to others several times, particularly, for example, in North America,
Mm-hmm.
anywhere, or actually in North or South America for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
Somebody may look very, very African and yet have more Scandinavian ancestors than I do.
Mm-hmm.
By a long shot.
Right.
But you also did get this in ancient times as well. Mm-hmm. And then you combine that with most ancient traditions, at least in Europe, having very strong adoption rituals, as did the Native Americans,
Yes.
at least in North America.
But like you say, it can help though if you're like my husband and you know you have ancestors in Norway.
Right.
If you're like me and you're not, you know you have Germanic ancestors, but you may not have any in the Viking world whatsoever.
Right.
Unless some of them may have had some relations with my Irish and Scottish kin, voluntary or otherwise. It doesn't matter because there is. I won't call it fictitious ancestry. I'd call it adoptive ancestry.
Right. And also you get, you may have someone of 100% pure Central Asian, and well, let's not say Central Asia because God knows Central Asia was the crossroads of the universe.
Yeah.
Maybe they're 100% pure Northern Japanese.
Right.
And they can trace their ancestry back for 2,000 years.
Yes.
Because they have the records.
Yeah.
That isn't to say that a Hellenic deity may not tap them on the shoulder, but because of their own cultural upbringing, it might be harder for them to hear it.
Exactly. Or they may perceive it differently and even worship them somewhat differently.
They maybe think that they are being called on by Amaterasu.
Yeah. Yeah. But I said, but even if they were to suddenly recognize the call, their particular way of showing devotion and worship that they might do, it might be quite unique.
Yes, it might indeed.
And there's one other thing I wanted to mention along this line, that there's a wonderful book that was written years ago called Goddesses in Every Woman. It's sitting over there. I don't think I remember the author's name, but she's a Jungian psychologist, and she later wrote one called Gods in Every Man. And what the basic premise of the book, she uses the Hellenic, but is that whether you're even religious, much less looking for a patron, at different times in your life or even doing different tasks, you can call upon various deities as archetypes. That may or may not be your patron. For example, you may be more of a Demeter type, a very motherly woman who, wants to make everybody in the household happy and fed, and that's your natural sort of state. But you've been, for whatever reason, maybe you have either joined the military or your husband has joined the military and you're now under siege and you have to act in a very military fashion. We're calling either on Athena or Artemis as archetypes, for that, getting through that task, getting my family through the siege of Sarajevo or whatever. It can be very helpful. And it's not that you've changed patrons or even changed personalities. It's that you're asking that deity to lend you some of their wisdom, understanding, help in order to get through this time period for which they are in charge of. So you may work mostly with the goddess of knitted hats, but if you suddenly find that you have to do some brewing, asking a god or goddess that has something to do with brewing, it's probably going to be helpful.
Right, and I certainly have association with more than just two or three that particularly come around and want me to do something for them. And you mentioned the archetype of it, and I know. Well, I'm a pretty hard polytheist, and I know that's not the way you meant it. The image, gods may be part of an archetype, but I don't think gods are, quote, just archetypes.
Oh, I don't either.
You don't either. But some people do.
Yes.
And of course, they are, I suppose, entitled to their mistaken opinion. She said with a grin. I'm a pretty hard polytheist. But I forgot where that train of thought was going.
I can actually add a little bit here, though. But just because I think that Enki from the Mesopotamian pantheon, who was a trickster, and Loki, who is a trickster in the Norse, they're both very distinct to me and very different deities. But they also are the trickster archetype.
Right.
The fact that a trickster archetype exists
doesn't mean that they're individuals with their own agendas,
or that there aren't people who are, either when he's acting. I think Tom Hiddleston is what I would think of as an avatar, which is not a Northern European word, but a representative of Loki. Not necessarily as a human being, but in that role. And that doesn't make Loki any less or him any more.
Right.
It just that it's he's doing that. And I think that the different pantheons tend to fall, because human beings tend to fall into certain personality categories and interests and things. If you look at any group of people, you're going to see a sort of Zeus or figure or a sort of Thor figure
or someone say, "Oh, she's got to work with Athena." I mean,
exactly. Yeah, this is is someone who's very and yet if you look at most pantheons, you will find someone who sort of reflects that similar energy among the gods. And again, my personal view is we cannot because humans create them,
right?
But it's humans perceiving them,
right? And it's once again, it's them making the decision.
Yes.
You may call on them and they may say, okay. Or you may call them and they may say, mm-mm. But it's really them making the decision. And thus you may find someone, I mean, I would have thought I would be the last person in half of North America that Odin would walk into my camp at midnight.
Right.
It's like, what? I certainly, excuse me, sir, I never called you.
Yes.
No, but anyway, he had other ideas. And so you may have a situation where someone is called upon by, let us say, rather than calling on a deity because they can do something that deity wants.
Yes.
And I think they find us very useful now and then, and I think they find the energy, the certain kinds of energy that certain kinds of humans can generate is apparently rather tasty.
Yeah.
What occasionally you get into this, what do the gods need us for? Well, apparently they do, or at least like. Maybe we make really good ice cream. I don't know. We're pretty good at brewing. So you'll end up with people often working with some types of deities that might be perceived as very unlikely for them.
Yes.
And the deity you work with as a young person may not be the one who turns up and taps on your shoulder when you're 50.
Exactly. Because you've changed. And that was part of getting back to the goddesses in every woman. That was part of, I think, her point with that.
Jin Shimoda Bolin.
Yeah, because she's over.
Bubbled up.
Yeah, she's over there in my stack of books. And, of course, she was writing, too, not so much from at least an officially religious viewpoint, but as a psychologist.
She was speaking of Jungian archetypes.
Yeah, but very much so. And I think some cultures understand this, particularly some of the Native American, not all, but some of them where you change 4 or 5 names over a lifetime. Because, she who has borne 7 children was not called that at age 19.
No. There's also, think about humans. You're not the same at work as you are talking to your significant other. No. You don't talk to your 3-year-old grandchild like you talk to your professional associate. No. And Mary Renault, getting back to her again, has a lovely translation of the tag. I think it must be her own translation because I can't find it anywhere else. One of the tags from the Bacchae, probably mangling the name Euripides. Yeah. And let's see. The gods wear many faces, and many fates fulfill to work their will. In vain man's expectation, gods bring the unthought to be, as here we see. Ooh.
I just read that recently, but it didn't chill in as much as what, and that's actually maybe a good final. I think I'm going to call this one Conversations with the Druid because we're kind of all over the place. Right. But the importance of poetry and song, and I mean I know that you basically are bard in the Druid tradition. Well, not the old kind. Okay, we all know that anybody who studied knows that a real bard. Okay, let's from back then had a very specific 20 year. I think it was 20 years or something.
Some such
thing. Under the boards and stuff. But in the modern organization,
I'm not ranked in the Bardic Guild yet.
I thought you were. Okay,
no, I'm not. My sister is.
That's how I got.
She's a master bard. But I'm not ranked yet, but that's because I've been putting my energy elsewhere.
Right.
And I will be one of these days, she said fairly confidently, because when I put the proper energy to it, I believe I will be able to achieve it.
So let's say you do a lot of bardic work.
Right.
And I just thought maybe talk a little bit about the importance of things like chant and song and poetry and things, because I think that was something that early on in the pagan, particularly neo-pagan revival, there was a certain amount of, particularly with Whitty and Penderin, and particularly fairy trad and things, and then it sort of fell into, for a long time, the joke was A minor, E minor, A minor, E minor. This is another pagan chant, and you know, and things were like a lot on that level for a long time. Sort of like nobody really looked, or very few people, not nobody. The ancestors were not as looked at in the way that if you do any reading at all about the traditional religions, they were vastly important, and they were just kind of like underwhelmed in the neo-pagan tradition. I think we're starting to get more poetry and real bardic skills, and I just talk about that a bit and what roles it plays.
Words are powerful, and that's always been a part of neo-paganism, but I find things are easier to remember if they're structured in meter and structured with rhyme.
Oh, that's a good point.
Think about, teaching little children Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, sort of thing. It's easier to remember. It's easier to get people to join in. I have encountered some very powerful poetry, which is not meter structured and which is not rhymed, but you have to know what the rules are before you break them.
Right.
Some people who try to do this without any discipline end up sort of splashed all over the page, and I forget who came up with the phrase "prose typed funny."
Yes, that's great.
I wish I don't remember who came up with that one, but where they just sort of splash random words and no, poetry doesn't have to have a structure to be poetry, but it has to have something, not just. But anyway, I think things are easier to remember if they're structured. Repetition is a good thing, and there's chants have a lot of repetition. You might have like the weaving songs and the Hebrides, the walking songs. One person sings the verse, and the other people sing back the chorus, and the first person sings another verse, and the other people sing back the chorus. Or they repeat the line. You get a certain amount of that in some of the Christian gospel churches. Brothers, tell us why we're here.
Children, go where I send thee.
Yes.
Where shall I send thee? Yes, I can hear that.
Yes, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's another one of those things that speaks to the primal mind.
Mm-hmm.
It goes deep, and that gets people's attention. If you want someone to really participate, to really integrate with your ritual, you can't just stand them in a circle and give them a sermon. That's not going to hold them any more than whatever religion they were brought up as children in held them, when they sat them down in a pew and gave them a sermon and didn't give them anything to do, to engage with. And I think singing, verse, chanting, pagans love to drum and chant.
Oh, they do.
That really gets your inner 3-year-old going.
And that was for a long time pretty much what there was. Yeah.
And it's better. It can be more and better, but it's vastly better than being stood in a circle and lectured.
Oh, I totally agree. And I actually enjoy, chanting and drumming. I want to point that out. But it's sort of like I also enjoy having a nice French toast breakfast like we did this morning with lots of maple syrup once in a while, but if I ate it every morning, I would feel kind of like unsatisfied.
Yes. We had a Yule ritual a couple of years ago. Actually, my sister was the liturgist for this one. And she had the idea of, I would steal the sun, which would be standing in for the sun was a Japanese gold paper lantern that we had lit very nicely from the inside with little LED things. And it was this beautiful big glowing gold sun caught in the branches of the world tree for the ritual. And partway through the ritual, on schedule, and I'm there being the proper Druid assistant for this particular rite, I suddenly flung on a midnight blue cloak, stole the sun, and ran out of the room with it. This is a Yule ritual.
So that's ritual theater, too.
Yes, it's ritual theater. And I'm standing in the hall where this was an indoor rite. We've done something very similar outdoors in a freaking howling snowstorm. But this was an indoor rite, so I'm out in the hall outside the room. And she starts drumming and chanting, to bring back the sun. I won't sang you her chant because she didn't say I could on the air. But she starts chanting and getting everyone, and I'm standing in the hall with my hand over my mouth, trying not to laugh because they are just getting into it. And finally, they got to the crescendo and stopped and called out, and I burst through the door with the sun. And
Oh, cool.
and I forget what I said. We had some rhymed verses. I brought the sun back and
Yeah.
placed it. It was fun. It was ritual theater. It was memorable.
Mm-hmm.
It gave people something to do. It was rhymed but simple. You didn't have to have someone with practice memorization to participate. And that was very, very good. That was a bardic thing.
Well, one thing too, I would imagine that it helps people with memorization, because I pointed out to my husband once that I realized I could sing from my childhood.
Yes.
Actually, large swaths of the Bible to this day, and mostly the King James Version.
Right.
Because that they were some of it was Sunday school songs, but some of it was old hymns and other things. And I think that is something that was sort of lacking until very recently. Now people are starting to create things that are memorable, that jog the memory, that will do the same thing. Of course, part of it is too, is that unlike Christianity, we're coming from more than one book, so to speak, and many times none at all.
Right.
So it's harder to know what we want to memorize.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think we're starting to make progress.
And you have people who can write various things. You have people who can write pieces of things and cobble them together. You have people who can at least find something really good in a book and borrow half of what Walt Whitman just said and put something else on the end for ritual purposes. Not like they're going to publish it.
Oh, exactly.
Own. But you can put together quite a lot of things that do what you need to do for the ritual. The other thing about creating ritual is very important to remember, and I've had to learn this one. What works for 8 people in a living room does not work for 25 in a backyard, and what works for 25 does not work for 40 in a park, and what works for 40 in a park is not going to work for 400 at a festival.
Yeah, right now I'm actually working with, I won't go into detail, but I'm working with some people in a ritual here in Ireland that I was in last year that suddenly got surprising 700 people.
Right.
And I'm helping them. We're all trying to rewrite this thing to, instead of the original 50 it was designed for, to what happens if we get 2,000. Because last year they were actually pulling in tourist buses unexpectedly. So, it has now gone from something that one person could do a particular role to where I'm pretty sure we need at least 3. And how do we do this? So it's a very different skill. The other thing I wanted to mention, just backtracking a bit, is taking things from other people, or to use in ritual, not to swipe and publish in a book or something. But if you're stuck, particularly a lot of times we wind up writing rituals under stress. And when I was early on as a priestess, one in my circle had passed away. And in fact, it was our high priest, which was very traumatic. Yes, I see the little kitty. We keep cooing over the little kitty in the corner. And that's a good example of voice change.
Yes, it is.
We don't, which is great to have recorded. But getting back to the story, when this man passed away, everybody was, of course, in a mess. And I'm like, I have to write something for this funeral. What will I say? And I looked through stuff, and I started looking through history books. And I wound up running into Deirdre's Lament. And so I used the patterning from Deirdre's Lament from the Irish translated into English, and I just rewrote them with things that were important to us. And I just found this the other day, and it's still tear-jerking. And I mean, and it only makes sense to people who knew him. But it meant that I had a structure.
You had a structure. And moreover, if you needed to, moreover, you could rework it again for someone else.
Oh, definitely. And I actually suggest Deirdre's Lament for, I'm not even going to try to pronounce them because we were joking about it earlier, Deirdre's Lament for the sons of...
Ushna?
Yeah, okay.
That's close.
But. Was really a good thing for a funeral because it would just work so universally.
Right.
You just substitute in what the person you're trying to remember, or for a memorial ceremony, or even an ancestor. You know, if you were doing something for your grandmother privately, or if you're doing it with a small group of people, you can, each person can add a line even, and it provides that, well, I think what would be called a liturgical structure almost.
Yeah,
writing
you need a
liturgy.
liturgical structure.
Yeah.
That's certain Christian churches get along splendidly with the liturgical structure. They don't make it up off the top of their head every time. There is nothing wrong with set prayers or set parts of liturgy if they're good. You know, it's not to say every day, every time we have a ritual, we must hail them exactly this way. But if you start with, we're going to hail the Earth Mother. Now we're going to do this. Now we're going to do this. The words may be different. You may have a different deity you're focusing on. But if you have a structure, if you find yourself, can you do a ritual tomorrow to honor so-and-so? Yeah.
Yeah. You got the basically, I guess what I'm saying is we don't all have to rewrite the wheel.
No, we don't. Don't have to rewrite the wheel. I like that.
Rewrite the wheel. I think I'm getting a bit tired and spacey here. It's been a very fun week. Rowan's been with me for several days now, and we've been having a great time. As you can probably tell from the incredibly structured way this interview is taking place. But I also thought that my audience might enjoy it. The kind of conversations that, you know, people that study even two different traditions can have and enjoy with each other. And the little kitty in the corner,
she's gone to sleep.
She's gone to sleep. Yeah, she's not talking to us anymore. But I think we've been going for actually a little more than an hour now. Okay. So it's probably, because we can get back together again on the phone, but it was really nice to have you here in person in Ireland and visiting. And I believe that you had just a little bit of a song or a poem or something we can kind of end with here.
That little Earth Mother chant.
Yeah, because we were talking about her.
This came out at one of the ADF, one of the Druid rituals, when approximately 10 minutes before the rite started, the celebrant that day turned to me and said, "Oh, you're barding for this one. Can you sing the thanks to the Earth Mother at the end of the rite?" And I said, probably. So I thought about it a little bit during the ritual. And steal from the best, I borrowed essentially a plain chant. And thought about it a little bit more, and I thought, I'm never going to remember anything fancy, anything rhymed, anything extremely structured, because I have to do my work and participate in this ritual while I'm trying to compose. Nothing like having a lot of warning. So basically what I came up with was, Holy Earth Mother, we thank you. Blessed Earth Mother, we thank you. Lovely Earth Mother, we thank you. And that was all.
And we'd like to thank you for being here this evening. And I look forward to seeing you again.
And I also.
And I want to thank everybody for joining us this week for Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.